Okay, I think that's it.
Cool.
We're on the air. Okay, so thank you, Joe Conway. Thank you very much for being here with us.
Yeah.
It's quite an honor because even though you don't know anyone of us, we at a certain in a certain sense know you quite well. At least part of you has been in our living rooms, in our desks, and even in the bathroom, I'm afraid. And it's because of this. So Joe's the co-author of what has been kind of like the Bible for iOS programming since many years. The iOS programming book, The Beginner Ranch Guide. This is the third edition. I have a few other editions somewhere around. And I guess everybody that started with iOS programming had this book just like this, full of notes and post-its. And I actually met Joe at a WWDC a few years ago while you were working at he was working at the Beginner Ranch, and we met for a dinner in an Italian restaurant. I wasn't very sure, but my wife showed me a picture, and yeah, you met the guy. You had some beer and wine with him. So I guess probably there was too much beer involved. That's why we weren't exactly sure where, if, when we had met. So again, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure and an honor to have you here. And okay, so this is kind of the past that has been very important for everybody that has learned iOS and still learning iOS development right now and for several years. But what's the present? What are you doing right now?
So right now, I started a consulting company about 2 years ago, writing software for lots of big companies, right? They have a hard time finding engineers. A lot of engineers these days want to work for a company that gets to try all the new fun stuff. And by being a consulting company, obviously, we get to work with different clients and therefore can try all the new fun stuff, as long as they let us. And that's been going on for a little over 2 years now, and we've grown to 13 people. And I still write code most of my days and really enjoy that aspect of it.
That sounds great. So then who does the management?
Jason does the management.
Jason.
Yes. Jason is someone Fernando and I both worked with for a long time, and he does a great job of it.
Okay, so hold on. Well, you mentioned some of your clients. What's a typical client that you have? Is it bigger companies, small companies that want to hit it big in the App Store, or startups?
Yeah, it's usually bigger companies, and I prefer to work with bigger companies. Number one, they're probably going to pay you because they have public shareholders, and not writing someone a check is very strange. Where small little startups sometimes say, well, we ran out of money, and therefore you don't get paid either. So we try to avoid those types of situations. We do work with well-funded startups as well. I kind of like having a nice mix. Like I said, doing fun and interesting things. You work with a big company and you sort of do the same thing over and over again. Sometimes it's on a somewhat fun project, but really you're just sort of doing the same thing. Get information from their database, show it in an app, allow them to add information back to that database. But it pays the bills very well, and it's very consistent, and you can kind of trust the person you work with. And the startup companies typically have the fresher ideas, and they have the ideas that you can sort of wiggle around on and try out different approaches and really have fun with it, I suppose. Less money involved, less consistent. They usually want something to a version 1 and be done with it, and hopefully that turns into a business for them, and sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. I would hope that we do such a great job of engineering it that it helps their cause to be a good business. But an established company obviously can continue iterating, and they don't have to. They have the money. They don't have to hire their own internal software team. They can just re-up with us every so often when they want to push a new update. So a mix is really what I like to have.
It's a mix. And the fact of being in Georgia, instead of being one of the main technological hubs, do you think that affects you? It would be perhaps wiser to be in the San Francisco Bay Area or in some other
It has its pros and cons, and obviously some of the pros are that I can actually afford a house here. That's very helpful. I think there is more of a focus specifically to Atlanta. I think there's more of a focus on the business aspect of it. I think in San Francisco and to a lesser extent perhaps New York, there's more of a focus on just the culture of it all. The culture of being a programmer, the culture of being in a startup. That kind of process. And to me, that's not really that appealing. No offense to people that do find that appealing. I just don't find that particular culture appealing. I enjoy doing my job and working very hard and going home to my family. To me, that's probably the most important thing, right? And so with that, though, obviously there's a lot more potential candidates for hiring in some of these bigger tech areas. Downside of that, of course, is that they're expensive. I think right now programmers are a little expensive. I think you can make a really good living as a programmer. Maybe perhaps your skill level doesn't necessarily correlate to your salary level. I think that's a temporary thing. I think it'll sort itself out. But here in Atlanta, obviously, what we get paid as programmers, or what my employees get paid very well, you live like a king. It's a very different thing versus in San Francisco. I think even if you're making very good money adjusted for San Francisco, you're still gonna have a hard time finding an apartment. That's the difference to me. Finding business here, it has not been a problem. There's obviously a lot of work is remote. We keep people in our own offices, and if we have a client who's not located in Atlanta, that's usually not that big of a deal. But we actually have a lot of clients in Atlanta as well, and there's a lot of big companies here. And those companies are not software-first companies. And so we almost... Yeah, exactly. And I was going to start saying names, and I realized they don't let you talk about those things. But they're not software-focused companies. They have an entirely different business that they're in. And that allows us to actually really sort of be a really valuable asset, more than just being able to write code for them. Rather, we actually see a landscape that they don't see. We're able to see how software and technology works and offer them suggestions on how to apply it to their business. And I think that's probably one of the more fun things for me now, transitioning from programmer to business owner. I'm actually thinking about, well, listen, what's valuable for your business? If you Coke, you sell bottles of Coke, you don't need some specific programming thing to go on to make your business work. You just need a solution that helps you sell more bottles of Coke. And thinking about it from that business angle, and like I said, here in Atlanta, that seems to be more important. There's less technology, and you get to be a bigger player in the technology space.
Okay, and a few questions. You mentioned that developers are a bit expensive right now. You mean in the Bay Area or all of the U.S.?
I think in general. It's interesting because being a programmer is sort of a lifelong journey, I think. Your first 5 years, you probably at the end of that 5 years maybe get to the point where you're like, wow, I know so much. And then all of a sudden you get hit with some sort of problem and you're like, wow, I actually know nothing, barely anything. And you spend the next 5 years trying to learn those things. And then every stone you uncover, you realize there's just an alternate dimension underneath it that you have no idea how it works. And so being a good programmer, I think obviously there's a lot of humility involved with it. There's a lot of understanding. Wow, there's lots of things I don't know. So how can I get to a point where I understand where I don't know? In that first 5 years, that's impossible for anybody. That's still learning to get to that point. So you couple that, people thinking they may know more than they actually do. And you couple that with companies that know nothing, right? Like if you're, for example, Coke again. If I'm hiring a programmer and I work in the business unit at Coke, there's no way I could really ascertain the abilities of a programmer because I'm not a programmer, So that sort of creates a little bit of inflation. Once you get a job, then you move to the next job and you get a little bit higher of a salary. And it seems like a lot of companies are hiring based on, well, how much did this person make at their previous job? Because that previous company was probably better able to figure out their value than I am because I don't know much. And I'll just give them a $10,000 raise and it goes up and up and up and up. Still not pegging salary to value at this point. So, we have folks come in that have come and interview for our company. They say, well, I'm making this amount and you sit them down, we give them a programming challenge. We have them sort of write a really basic application to sort of stress test the things that I think are important, which are, can you put screens up in an app? Can you go and hit a web service? Can you separate model, view, and controller objects? And can you kind of write an app that just sort of works and isn't brittle? And some of these people coming in saying, well, I need to make 6 figures. I don't know what that translates to, but I need to make a lot of money. I'm currently making a lot of money, and they can't actually get through the programming challenge. And it's one of those things that, you know, this type of programming challenge isn't to necessarily challenge someone, although the name would indicate as such, but it's really to make sure, do you know the basic fundamentals of being a productive developer? And they're unable to get through it. And you start digging a little bit deeper, well, why aren't they able to get through it? And you start asking them more fundamental questions related to computer science and how a computer works. And there seems to be sort of a mismatch between, well, I can become an iOS developer, I can read Joe's book, and now I'm an iOS developer, and well, this is how a computer actually works, and this is what a pointer is. And this is how numbers actually are interpreted by a computer. That part's missing. That's sort of the part that lays that foundation for understanding the things that you don't know. Because if you know how a computer works, a computer is pretty simple. If you know how a computer works, and then you see what's on top of that computer, like the iOS SDK, for example, you find yourself able to really quickly figure out, okay,